In today's episode, we unravel a chilling murder mystery. The body of an unknown victim is discovered in a barrel in the cellar at 139 Harley Street, Cavendish Square, London. Suspicion quickly falls on the household staff, but with a high turnover rate and the body decomposing for about 2 years, the investigation is anything but straightforward. Join us as we piece together clues, delve into Victorian London, and strive to uncover the identity of the murderer. This is Historical Crime Chronicles. Let's go back in time and find out if justice was served, or if the secrets remain buried forever. It is 1880 and Mr. Jacob Henriquez, a Jewish West India merchant and banker, is living at 139 Harley Street in London. The gentleman, born in Jamaica in 1818, set up the Henriquez brothers West Indian merchants and came to London soon after 1840. He quickly settled into London life, got married, and has 7 children. He has been living at this address for 20 years, and the house is 40 doors away from the private residence of the Prime Minister. Harley Street is a magnet for the fashionable and wealthy, wanting to show off their beautiful Georgian homes. From 1860 onwards, this street attracts many doctors due to its central location, along with the prestigious homes the area has to offer. It is the height of upstairs-downstairs living, and Mr. Jacob Henriquez has 7 servants, including a butler and footman. The butler, Mr. Spendlove, had been in the employment of Mr. Henriquez for 18 months. During this time, the butler had complained about unpleasant smells coming from the cellar, which led to the repair of a drain. However, this did not fix the problem. On the morning of the 3rd of June 1880, Mr. Spendlove made a shocking discovery. He started to clean up in the cellar. In doing so, he came across a galvanized iron cistern which sat on top of a brick staging. In the opening underneath the cistern was a large sugar barrel in an upright position. Placed on top of the barrel were some bottles and gallipots. During the cleaning process, Mr. Spendlove opened the barrel. He was horrified to find a human body forced inside, along with what at first was thought to be quicklime. The remains were greatly decomposed, so much so that any identification seemed unlikely. The authorities were informed straight away, and Chief Inspector Lucas and Detective King led the investigation. Dr. Spurgin, the divisional surgeon, attended the scene at the house. The lid was put back on the barrel and the remains were removed to the Marylebone Workhouse mortuary for further investigation. A full search of the cellar was then carried out, which resulted in the discovery of a potential murder weapon. A rusty knife was concealed somewhere in the cellar. An inquest was opened on the following Monday at the Buffalo's Head, Marylebone Road, by Dr. Hardwick, who was the coroner for Central Middlesex. As soon as the inquest was opened, the jury went to the mortuary. It was common practice for the jury to view the body. The homeowner, Mr. Henriquez, is a well-respected man of the community. He is one of the founders of the West London Synagogue and is the first to give evidence. Mr. Henriquez gave the following account of what happened on that awful morning. I was at breakfast Thursday at 9:30 when the butler came and told me he wanted to speak to me particularly. I went outside the dining room door and said, "What has happened?" He said, "I have discovered some remains." I said, "Of a newborn child?" He said, "No. It is something concealed in a barrel." I said, "The first thing to do is to send for the police." He did so, and 2 policemen came and went down to the area. I went down and they pointed out a barrel to me. 1 policeman went away, and nothing was done until the inspector came. I saw the barrel in front of the cellar door. It is a small cellar, used as a knife room where boots and knives are cleaned every morning. There is a closet in the cellar and in a cellar beyond where the barrel was found. The police sent for a medical man, and I have since heard that the remains of a human being in a decomposed state were found in the barrel. My present butler has been with me for 18 months. I gave a list of every servant who has been in my employ during the time I have lived there. I leave my house in charge of the servants for about 6 weeks in the autumn. The same parties have had charge of my house for the past 4 years, and I have had repairs done in the spring. I have not noticed any unpleasant smells, and I was satisfied that it had not come from the drains as I had had them carefully attended to. It was suggested that it might come from the dustbin, but I had that attended to, and nothing more was said about it. The man, wife and son who had charge of my house during my absence for the past 4 years were not my regular servants who were away with me. It's the Victorian period. Domestic servants did tend to come and go. Maids and footmen tend to move on to other positions to try and better themselves and gain a higher wage. The butler is generally the highest paid and is in charge unless there was a housekeeper. At the inquest, Mr. John Spendlove, 37 years of age, shared the following. My pantry and sleeping room are down below. I usually sleep in the house and go home once a month. When I first went to Harley Street, I noticed some smells. The drains were not looked into in my time, but the dustbin was attended to. There are 3 cellars in the area, 2 for coal and the other contains the closet, the boot house and the cistern. The footman cleans the boots, but I do not know whether he had noticed the smell. On Thursday morning I went in to see if there was anything to be cleared away, as we keep wine cases there. I had been in the inner cellar before. I made up my mind to remove the barrel which was under the cistern, which stood against the wall and was supported by 1 pier. The barrel had been there ever since I came. I thought it was full of empty seltzer water bottles. On Thursday morning I thought I would move it, and did so, and took off about 4 or 5 empty seltzer bottles. It was not quite daylight. Having moved the bottles, I saw what I thought at first was an effigy. I then called the footman, and we concluded it was a human being. We then went and told Mr. Henriquez. I left the tub where it was, and the police brought it to the door. I did not know the butler who was employed before me. I have seen him once or twice. I believe his name is Henry Smith. He called at the house once or twice about his character, and it was then I saw him. The cellar was accessible from the street, and Mr. Spendlove mentioned that there were steps to the cellar. He said, "The gate is locked about dusk and remains so all night." The gate and steps which lead down to the cellar doors from the street can still be seen from the front of the house 144 years later. Arthur Kirkland, the footman, at the time the body was discovered, was then asked to give his account of the discovery. He said, "I have been with Mr. Henriquez about 12 months. I noticed a slight smell, but nothing particular. On Thursday morning I was cleaning boots in the front part of the cellar when the butler called me. I thought the remains looked like the remains of a human being. We at once told Mr. Henriquez, who sent for the police. The butler and I both sleep downstairs. The key of the area gate is given to Mr. Henriquez." Dr. Frederick Spurgin examined the remains, assisted by Dr. Bond and Professor Pepper from St. Mary's Hospital. They found that the body had been placed in the barrel head first. The body was female and the hair was dark brown. It had been long hair, but it was cut off, maybe by the murderer. A red coral bead was embedded in the flesh of the jaw. There had been clothing on the body, but most of it had rotted away. Only small fragments of clothes, such as a garter on the right leg, part of a chemise, drawers and stocking remained. They were all made from common rough materials, so it was suggested that the female was from a lower class. Dr. Spurgin had measured the body and suggested it was 4 foot 7 inches. He formed an opinion that the body had been there more than a year, but it may be longer. On the left side there was an opening between the 4th and 5th ribs, and he suggested that this was the cause of death. Professor Pepper of St. Mary's Hospital also came to the conclusion that the body was that of a woman and was over 30 but perhaps over 40 years of age. He said that the probable cause of death was a stab wound just above the heart. There was a fracture of the spine which was probably caused by pushing the body into the barrel. He stated that the person was not old. They had all of their teeth apart from 3 on the upper jaw. Some of the jaw was also missing, which could have been removed by some violence at the time of death. He thought that the woman had been dead for about 2 years. At this point, the investigation was going in 2 different directions. The police were inundated with missing person letters. Some people thought that the barrel must have been stored elsewhere and then moved into the cellar, as the smell would have been unbearable if it had been stored there the whole time. Another suggestion was that the body was not put in the barrel immediately after death, as the barrel would have contained large quantities of blood stains at the bottom. It was time to find the other servants. The inquest was adjourned and they arranged to meet again in a week's time. After more investigating, it appeared that the murderer did not use quicklime. Instead, they used chloride of lime, which was a well-known antiseptic. Was this a mistake by the murderer or intended? The doctors suggested that with this substance around the body, it would not start to smell until 2 months after the murder was committed. The police made inquiries into all of the past servants to see if any of them were missing, but all were accounted for. On the following Monday, Henry Smith, the previous butler to Mr. Henrique, appeared at the inquest. Henry had worked at the house for 18 months between June 1877 and December 1878. After this, he joined the 3rd Foot Surrey Regiment, quite soon after leaving Mr. Henriquez's employment. At the inquest, he was asked to give an account of his time at Harley Street, to which he said the following: "I think William Tinnap was the footman. I cannot give any clue to this matter. I do know the cellar, which the footman and I only used, but I do not remember any cask under the cistern, nor any seltzer water bottles. I very rarely went into the inner cellar. I used to live in Woodstock Street, but I was discharged for being the worse for drink. It was a little before Christmas in the year 1878. I used to sleep in the servants' hall and the footman in the pantry. The area gate was open all day, and it has been open at night, however I know of no one coming in at night. I was married when I came there. My wife is now in service at Dorchester. There was some disorderly conduct on the part of a footman named James Bright while I was there. He got drunk and fell down, making a noise. He used to come home drunk and I let him in. He never brought anyone in with him. George Minter was footman when I first went to Harley Street, and he left to better himself. I always slept in the servants' hall and was responsible for closing the house, though I have allowed other persons to do it occasionally. When I was out all night, the footman used to lock up. For 4 or 5 months, I was out about 3 nights a week, as my wife was staying in Latimer Road. I do not remember a footman going out at night. I was discharged for allowing Tinnap to go out at night, but I did not know that he went out in my absence. I used to go into the cellar 3 or 4 times a week, but never saw either the cask or the seltzer bottles, and I did not myself dig a hole in one of the cellars, but I had a man to do so. This was about 3 months before I left. It would be about the autumn of 1878. There was some mouldy bread which I wanted to get rid of, but the man said he could not make a hole as the flooring was concrete. The man's name was Green, an old stableman. He was about the neighbourhood all the time. There was nearly a box full of bread, and I feared I should get into trouble about it. It seems rather far-fetched to me that he would try to bury the mouldy bread so he wouldn't get into trouble. Why didn't he throw the bread away on a rubbish collection day, or burn it instead of going to the trouble of digging up the cellar? John Green, a coachman, was next on the stand. He said, "I am 73 years of age and have lived in Marylebone for 40 years. I was asked once by Henry Smith if I was a pavior, as he had seen me laying some stones. He wanted me to put a few bricks down in the cellar. I think it was the autumn of 1878. I went to the cellar and saw bricks had been taken up and scattered about, the space being about a yard square. I collected the bricks together and relaid them. I did not ask him what he took them up for. It was the middle cellar where this took place. I think the next morning Smith said, 'Come and tidy up the cellar.' I went into the cellar and made everything tidy. I did not see the cistern or barrel or anything of that kind. Another day, Mr. Smith asked me to take some mould out of another cellar on the garden side, and I told him I was not strong enough. He had better get a scavenger to do it. He simply wanted me to take it away. I do not know the caretakers of the house, and I was never further than the pantry. Regarding the mouldy bread, John Green said, 'That cellar was at the back of the house. Smith did not say anything about burying bread. He did not tell me to dig a hole. I thought somebody must have been digging for the drain. I had to level the rubbish which was in the hole. I hinted to Smith to pay me, but he only gave me a glass of ale, which he said would make it right. When I swept out the inner cellar, I did not see the knife or the pokers, but there were packing cases. I made a clean sweep of the cellar, but I did not sweep under the cistern. There was some confusion as to the various cellars, so the coroner suggested that John Green was accompanied by Sergeant King to the house to examine the cellar and to show the exact place where he had worked. When they returned, Mr. Green recollected seeing a heavy box in the inner cellar but could not remember the seltzer bottles. Maybe Henry Smith had the body in the heavy box and was planning to bury it. However, when he hit concrete, he needed to fix the floor and find an alternative hiding place. A yard-square hole just for mouldy bread does not sound likely. William Tinnap, a previous footman of Mr. Henriques, stood up to give evidence, stating, "I live at St. Anne's Barns as a footman. I entered Mr. Henriques' service on the 18th of August 1878 and left in June 1879 to better myself. Smith and Spendlove were butlers while I was there. I remember the inner cellar. It was used for lumber in my time. The seltzer bottles were thrown on the top of the barrel. There was a strong smell which I thought was made by cats, but I do not remember if the barrel was there during Smith's time. I believe it was definitely there before Mr. Spendlove came. I remember that several bricks in the cellar were loose, but I did not know that Mr. Green had put them down. The butler would superintend the removal of the dust, and the refuse from the kitchen would be put in the dust hole. I never heard of bread being placed there." Mr. William Spendlove, the current butler, was recalled to the stand, and he said, "The dustmen do not come regularly. I have to request them to come, and I am not aware that any bread was put into the dustbin. Just animal bones and other kitchen refuse are placed in the dustbin." If it was the butler's job to ask the dustbin men to come, it is possible that it would have been Henry Smith's duty as well when he was butler. Therefore, he could have easily requested the dustbin men to get rid of the mouldy bread. Mrs. Esther Jury, who was Mr. Henriques' cook from 1874 until 1878, was the next witness. When called to the stand, she shared the following. "I am living in my own home at Hornsey. Mr. Campbell was employed at the house before Smith. I remember both very well. I had nothing to do with the front cellars, as I drew coals from another cellar altogether. I never heard of any intoxication on their part, but Mr. Campbell was sent away for something concerning my kitchen maid. The kitchen offal was collected and disposed of. When questioned about mouldy bread, she said, 'There was no waste of bread, never a scrap during my time. This would be a sign of very bad housekeeping.' She never heard of there being any accumulation of stale bread. She said, 'I never heard of the bricks in the cellar being taken up for the purpose of burying bread, and I never heard of any mould being in the back cellar. There is no garden at the back, only a stable, and the kitchen is lighted by a dome.' She went on to say, 'I do not think the knife produced belonged to Mr. Henriques, as they generally used black-handled knives.' Mr. William Tinnap was also questioned about the knives. He said, 'Mr. Henriques' knives had a crest on them, which he could not see on the knife produced.' I know nothing of the missing pokers. Smith was in the service when I left." Answering the questions presented to him, William Tinnap recalled, "I was living at the Alexandra Hotel before I went to Mr. Henriques. I am a native of Berlin. There is no garden at the back of the house, and I never heard of any mould being there." George Campbell was then called. He said, "I am the butler of 134 Harley Street now, where I have been for about a month. I was butler at Mr. Henriques for about 5 months in 1877, when he gave me notice to leave on account of something. I was followed by Bortham, and he by Smith, whom I used to see occasionally. I recollect the cellars. Lumber used to be kept in the inner cellar. I do not remember any seltzer bottles nor any barrel under the cistern. The flooring of the cellar seemed to be firm in my time. I do not know the witness green. but I remember 2 stones being taken up in the area, but I never noticed any particular smell. George Minter of 90 Queen's Gate was a former footman, and he was also called as a witness. I was at Harley Street from 1874 to 1877. Smith came before I left. I do remember the cellars. I used to go into the inner one to split up the cases. But I do not remember seeing a barrel under the cistern, and I do not recollect Green coming. I used to clean the boots, sometimes in the cellar and sometimes in the pantry. I do not remember the floor of the cellar being taken up while I was there. The seltzer bottles were simply thrown in upon the floor frequently. About a bottle or 2 a day were used. I never observed any objectionable smell. The other people who would have had access to the cellar and keys to the cellar gate was the staff that looked after the house for 6 weeks of the year every autumn when Mr. Henriquez was away. The usual staff members went with him, which left Robert Woodruff in charge of looking after the house. Robert Woodruff of 80 Charlotte Street, Portland Place, was called as a witness at the inquest. He said, "I have had the care of this house in Harley Street for about 2 months in each of the past 6 years. I have seen the cellars in question, but have only been inside them once. That was about 2 years ago. I took a cat down there to hunt for rats. There was a box in the left-hand corner full of hay and moss which I turned to see if there were any rats in it. Under the cistern was a barrel, under which I poked a stick to find if the rat was there. I noticed no particular smell. That would be in August 1878. I noticed that some bricks had been removed in the middle cellar, which I supposed had been done to get at the drains. I always had charge of the area gate, which I generally kept locked. I have seen Smith and have heard that he has gone into the army." Again, it comes down to the summer of 1878. This seems to be the time when the barrel appeared. It does not necessarily mean that is when the body was placed in the barrel. However, we know that the body could have been stored in there for about 2 months in the chloride of lime with it starting to smell. Henry Charles Goatley, a plumber of 35 Dalby Street, Kentish Town, carried out some work at the house 2 years prior. He said, "I was sent for by Mr. Henriquez to put a new valve on the cistern. It was about July 1878. I noticed a cask under the cistern, the same as the one produced. I did not move it. It was pushed right to the back. I stood on a champagne case to do the work. Mr. Smith was there part of the time, but I didn't notice any particular smell. The witness was asked, 'But surely plumbers ought to know different smells?' To which he answered, 'We have to work in so many different smells, you get used to them.' I've been to 139 Harley Street to do work, and have seen the middle cellar in company with Inspector King. The flooring is of brick, which appears to have been down for years. One brick was loose. Underneath the brick I found soil, and 3 inches below I found a slab. The opening was about 3 feet wide, and under that I found a cesspool, which appeared never to have been emptied. It had an inlet and an outlet to the sewer." Inspector George King stated, "On the first day I went to 139 Harley Street, I was told that the bricks had been removed in the cellar by Mr. Spendlove to search for a brooch which had been lost. The last witness, Mr. Goatley, dug under my direction, and I am positive the soil had been disturbed. Smith told me that he dug in the cellar to bury bread, but finding the ground hard, he disposed of the bread a different way. In the other cellar, where the body was found, the soil appeared not to have been disturbed, although the bricks had been moved, but there were marks of fire on the walls. That was accounted for by William Tinnap having burnt some refuse. Mr. Spendlove was then questioned regarding the bricks. Me and Tinnap took up the bricks in the middle cellar to search for a brooch Mrs. Henriquez had lost, on the supposition that it had been hidden there. The bricks had evidently been laid down by someone not in the habit of doing so." He went on to say that William Tinnap had lit a fire in the cellar to take away the smell. That would account for the wall being scorched. William confirmed this by saying, "I lit some brown paper to take away the smell caused by the cats. That was in 1879. The inspectors Lucas and King didn't find any evidence of chloride of lime anywhere else in the cellar, apart from inside the barrel and a small bit on the sides. After a few minutes' deliberation, the jury returned a verdict of willful murder against some person or persons unknown. The government offered a reward of £100 for anyone with information that would lead to an arrest and conviction of the person or people who committed the murder. A free pardon was offered to any accomplice, not the actual murderer, but by the 19th of June, the coroner's court had closed its inquiry. Based on the medical evidence, the cause of death was a stab wound to the left breast, but the murderer and the victim was still a mystery. A year after the inquiry was closed, Mr. Henriquez still lived in Harley Street along with his family. In 1882, he was elected chairman of the council at the synagogue and was a big donator to Jewish charities. He died in 1898, aged 87, and no more evidence or witnesses came to light. Mr. Spendlove, the butler, was still working at the house in 1881, but as time went by, he eventually moved on, and by the 1891 census, he was no longer living at the house. He was still a butler with a different employer and was living with his wife and 5 children. Mr. Spendlove died in 1925, aged 82. What happened to Henry Smith? As this is a common name, it is difficult to find out exactly. However, there is a Henry Smith, aged 28, who deserted the army on the 13th June 1881 at Kingston, Surrey. This is about a year after the body was found. Maybe he was the murderer. Maybe he thought he was too easy to find being in the army. Would more evidence arise or more witnesses come forward, it would have played on his mind if he were guilty. As we wrap up our journey through the mystery of the Harley Street murder in Victorian London, we are left with more questions than answers. A woman's life was tragically cut short, and her story was buried deep beneath the bustling streets where life went on, oblivious to the dark secret hidden below. Nobody will ever know the true identity of the poor woman found in that cellar, nor the sinister events that led to her untimely demise. Her fate is a haunting reminder of the many untold stories lurking in the shadows of history, and her story, like many others, deserves to be remembered and pondered. If you enjoyed this dive into an unsolved mystery, please give us a like and hit that subscribe button to stay updated with more intriguing crime chronicles. Your support helps us continue to uncover and share these fascinating stories from the past, keeping the memories of these lost souls alive. History is full of secrets waiting to be discovered, and together we can keep exploring them, one story at a time. Thank you for watching Historical Crime Chronicles. See you next time.